The Silver Valley of North Idaho is a rugged place. The valley follows the course of the South Fork of the Coeur d'Alene River, which includes canyons and gullies that branch off into the surrounding mountains. Tall trees, icy streams, and rugged terrain are common. This is a place of great beauty, but it also can be harsh and unforgiving. Since the late 1870s, when gold was found in its streams, the valley has attracted people with character to match its own. Rugged people, adventurers with strong backs, a belief in hard work, and the fierce independence needed to survive these mountains. Miners and loggers were the first settlers. The mountains hid untold wealth, and the miners were determined to find it. Loggers provided timber for homes and for supports in the deep mines that were being developed. The rocks held gold and silver, lead and zinc. Within 50 years, the valley would become known as one of the richest mining districts in the world. Tens of thousands of families would live in the valley, with over 100 mines producing metals that flooded the region with wealth. None shone brighter than the Sunshine Silver Mine near Kellogg, Idaho.
You are my sunshine, my only sunshine. You make me happy when skies are gray. You never know, dear, how much I love you. Please don't take my sunshine away.
The Sunshine started as the Yankee Lode in 1883, claimed and mined by two brothers from Maine, True and Dennis Blake. Their claim, located up a gully known as Big Creek just east of the town of Kellogg, was different from other nearby claims. It was rich in silver rather than the more common mineral galena, a heavy lead ore mined in the valley. True and Dennis were farmers and used their mine to subsidize their farm. They raised fruits and vegetables in the rich creek bed meadows below the mine and made a good living selling them to hungry miners and their families. It wasn't until 1914 that Dennis's widow Hattie leased the mine out, and in 1918 the Sunshine Mining Company was incorporated. The company struggled for several years as the price for metals rose and fell. In 1932, a bold gamble paid off. Scarce dollars had been spent on exploring deep in the mine. Just when the ore looked played out, the fabulous Sunshine Bonanza was discovered, and by 1937, the Sunshine Mine was the top silver producer in the world, mining over 12 million ounces of silver that year. The story of the Sunshine Mine is the story of the mines and miners of the Silver Valley and of Western hard rock mining. Conditions in the mine could be brutal, with humidity of 100% and temperatures deep in the mine over 100 degrees.
They said the rock temperature of the walls was 112 degrees. And when we'd walk in there in the morning and stuff, it was like walking in the jungle because you'd have steam waist high until you got your fans all running again.
The Sunshine, like many of the high-producing mines in the Silver Valley, sat atop an active fault zone. This made it possible for the rich minerals to be deposited in the rocks and made it very dangerous to mine them. The men attracted to this work were a hardy breed, physically strong, unafraid of danger, and independent to a fault. They worked hard and played harder. The mines paid good wages to those willing to work for them. Miners who worked in drifts, raises, and shafts were known as chippos and were paid a production bonus beyond their expected day's pay.
Back then it was super. It was really neat because you didn't have any supervision. You didn't have any rules really to go by. Whoever you worked with taught you what you were supposed to do. And the people underground were, I'd say, a little on the wild side. A lot of horseplay, but I mean, everybody worked real hard, and the money was real super.
I think that people played hard, they worked hard, they made good money, they spent good money, and you put up with the heat, you put up with the air blasts and things like that, because hopefully you'd be around to spend next week's paycheck, which would buy you an extra case of beer or something.
The Sunshine Mine was the richest of the silver-producing mines in the Silver Valley. By the time it closed in 2001, it had produced over 360 million ounces of silver. Its place in history, though, comes not from its silver, but from an infamous event that no one believed could happen. May 2nd, 1972 was a pretty spring day. 172 men went underground on the day shift, expecting to do what they had always done. The mine was huge by any standard, spreading over 2 miles east and west and over a mile north and south. The mine that had started with an outcropping on the surface was now nearly 6,000 feet deep, with working levels every 200 feet and hundreds of miles of old worked-out areas called Old Country by most of the miners. These areas were sealed off from the current working areas by cinder block or timbered walls called bulkheads or stoppings. Huge fans on the surface and vent tubes or boreholes underground moved air to the faces and other work areas. Because the mine was so large, ventilation was a constant problem.
The Sunshine Mine had a lot of leakage through ventilation control bulkheads from the exhaust back into the intake. So Sunshine followed recommendations to use polyurethane foam, sprayed in place, rigid polyurethane foam, to seal those bulkheads and make them essentially airtight. And of course that was done. That product, by the way, was marketed as non-burning and self-extinguishing and safe for use in underground mines.
A system of track-mounted man trains and underground shafts called winzes moved miners to their work areas, which were over a mile horizontally and nearly a mile vertically from the main surface shaft called the Jewel. The 3,700 level was the main transportation level from the Jewel shaft out to the number 10 shaft that provided access to the lower regions of the mine. The number 10 shaft had 4 compartments and 2 hoists. The largest was the big double drum hoist on the 3,100 level that was used to haul ore and waste rock from deep in the mine to the 3,700 and 3,100 levels, where it could be transported by train to the Jewel shaft. This hoist had cages suspended below the 2 main decks that could hold 9 men each, but it was not usually used to hoist miners. The men actually rode a single drum hoist called a chippy. This hoist was a 4-deck cage that could hold 48 miners at a time. The hoist man for the chippy hoist was on the 3,700 level. The Sunshine used men called cagers who stayed with the cage in a shaft and communicated with the hoistman by a system of bells to make sure the supplies or ore were hoisted to the right level. On May 2nd, the men took the man train out to the number 10 chippy hoist and were taken down to the many working levels of the mine. Miners generally worked in 2 or 3 man crews in remote areas called headings and carried their tools and lunch buckets with them. Chippos didn't want to waste a precious minute that could keep them from making their rounds. They didn't stop working if they could help it and even ate their lunches on the run.
When you're jippoing, that's what I was doing, my partner and I, we were jippoing, you're actually working in a double pace speed. Your speed is double pace. Try to get as much done as you possibly can within the 8-hour period.
The morning of May 2nd, 2 raise miners on the graveyard shift had noticed smoke. This was not unusual. Ventilation fans or train motors often had small electrical fires. After a blast, when the air was thick with the smell of explosives and dust, it was hard to smell anything else.
Some of the guys said they smelled smoke, but Jimmy and I, we come out that morning, and neither one of us smelled anything. But then we were really used to working and we'd shoot rounds and go right back in.
On the day of the Sunshine Mine fire, I had worked graveyard. The night before, we came out of the mine about 6 o'clock in the morning. As we came out of the number 10 shaft on 3,700 level, we went by the Strand substation. As we came by that Strand substation, Glenn Shoup, who was one of the guys on our crew, and actually the lead man of our crew, asked me if I smelled smoke. And I said, yes, I did. And Ray Rudd, who was the shift foreman that night, had just lit a cigarette. But he had lit it with a wood match. And we just kind of put it off to that.
The day shift started early at the Shine, and most men ate their lunch around 10:30 or 11. In some areas, it was noticeably smoky. But again, no one thought this was anything to worry about. By 11:30, however, it was obvious there was a problem, and a big one. Smoke was thick on the 3700 level, which was the primary escapeway. It was coming down the number 10 shaft and spreading through the lower regions of the mine.
The day of the fire, I'd been in 4800 level, and I came back up to 3700 for lunch. I repacked my supplies and went out, and as I got on the station, I seen the cagers say, "See ya," and they went down. And that was about 11:30 in the morning. I'd say 10 minutes later, you couldn't hardly see across that station because of the smoke. And from there on in, it got worse.
Shift bosses began rounding the men up, since no one knew where the fire was or how serious it was.
Dwellin Kitchen was my partner. A motorman came back and told us, "You better come out," because they said there's smoke out here. So I told him, I said, "Well, we better get out of here," because I said, this guy came back after us. I said, they're going to have to send it, they'll just send him back here again, you know. And I said, we don't need that. So we took off on the motor, and we got to the 15 rays, and it was a solid wall of smoke. I mean, just white. So we sat there and decided if we was going to go back. And I told him, I said, well, if we go back, I said, they're going to send somebody else. And I said, the switches almost got to be all open for us. So I said, because we couldn't see, I told him, I said, let's just put it on one point, let it go.
The men gathered at the shaft stations on the different levels and waited for the cages to come and take them to safety. In 1972, there were no regulations for hard rock mines that required miners to either wear self-rescuers to protect themselves against carbon monoxide or be trained in how to use them. The Sunshine was one of the few mines in the area to even provide them, but they were stored at the shaft stations on different levels of the mine. They were kept in cabinets near the first aid stations, not with the miners themselves. As the men gathered at the stations, they were already having trouble breathing because of the smoke. Unfortunately, few knew that the invisible carbon monoxide was the biggest danger.
It became smoky, so we went out towards the station wondering what the heck's going on. And Virgil Bebbs was my shifter at the time. He come out to the station, got on the phone, and he was talking on the phone for a while, and I couldn't hear what was said. Finally, he says, go back and get everybody out of their working places. We had a motor crew there, and my partner and I, so we started pulling everybody out of their working place. Went and told them to get out the station. When you came out on the station, the smoke was coming from the east side. It was getting real thick and heavy. So most people tended to wander off the station where they could be in fresh air. We stayed on the station, hoping to get a ride out. We were there quite a while. We'd send guys out the station, see if anybody was there or not. Finally, a cager came down. He wasn't really a cager, he was a pipe fitter. He volunteered to cage that day.
Well, as we were going there, you know, everybody was getting coughing and hacking and stuff like this.
The problem is seeing, because when the smoke is so thick, sometimes you absolutely can't see your hand in front of your face. And you put your light down, take your light off and hang it down close to your feet so you can see the track to keep from getting lost where you're going.
It was so smoky, you'd put your hand out like that, and you couldn't even see your hand, your light. It was just thick.
My partner and I, there was a little box of self-rescuers up on the walls that nobody knew what to do. So I and my partner took the box down and got these half-hour self-rescuers out and started handing them out. Well, some of them you couldn't push a button to get them activated because they were rusted up.
And I told Kitch, I said, there was some self-rescuers laying there. I said, grab one of them. And we tried to punch the buttons on them, and you couldn't punch the buttons, so we had to smack them with a wrench to get them working. So we got the self-rescuers on and stuff. But then again, you take it out because, you know, I mean, it was smoke. Nobody was thinking CO. It wasn't a clue.
Greg Dione, a 23-year-old pipe fitter, was working that day. He was trained as a cager, and when the skip finally arrived, he was on it.
Greg came down, and the smoke was so thick he couldn't see it, and he had these self-rescuers. They looked like a tuna fish can that had a little knob in the center that you pushed it and it broke the seal so you could breathe through it. Well, he handed them out to everybody and says, push that little knob and stick them on and don't take them off. He says, they will get hot. So I grabbed mine and pushed on it. I sucked on it, put my nose plugs on, sucked on it, and said, this thing ain't no damn good. He says, you gotta break it. So he took out his pipe wrench and went around and broke everybody's seal so you could breathe through it. He says, now stick them on and don't take them off. So he stood by the shaft. He says, okay, the skip's here. And he started pushing guys out in the shaft. And it was so smoky, I wasn't so sure the skip was there. I was glad when I stepped out that my feet hit something. But he packed us in there as tight as he could. There was no gates on it. This was the double drum skip. He put more on there than you should, but that's fine. He moved it nice and slow. We all got situated. He says, you ready? And we said, yep, and we went up. Greg Dayon took the people off of 46. The way I understand it, he skipped the 48 level because we told the crews on 48 to get back to the borehole. He went to the 5,000 level, got a few people off the 5,000 level, sent them up, and Greg Dayon did not make it out. I went to school with Greg Dayon. He was a good friend of mine all the way through school. Greg was a pipe fitter, his normal job, but he's an experienced cager. He knew we were in trouble. He volunteered to help get people out. He knew where the respirators were. He got the respirators. He went down and did what he could. And I honestly believe that's the only reason they made it.
I told Kitch, I said, let's get over by the shaft. So when we got over by the shaft, it was smoky over there and stuff. And we had their self-rescuers in. And the cager, if I remember right, was Greg Dayon. And he said, get on. And it was smoky enough. I said, what are you talking about? And he said, get on. And then I realized there was a cage set in there. So I got on the cage and I reached back for Kitch. There was going to be 13 of us on a 9-man cage. And I reached back for Kitch and I pulled him on. And
And it wasn't him?
no, I grabbed some kid that just got back from Vietnam.
The day of the fire, I was working on 4400 back at the number 10 shaft. I was in a shrink stope with my partner, and we were told by the motor crew that was pulling our muck that we were to evacuate the mine, that the mine was on fire. And I thought that to be really odd. I really did, because I thought, fire, what could burn here in the mine? I mean, burn a hard rock mine. There's the only wood that you really see is just what's in the drift, and I don't see anything burning. And then we walked through an air door, and as we opened up that air door, it was so thick of smoke, you could barely see what was in front of us, just maybe a foot at the very most.
There was no panic. No, everybody was calm. That's half the reason I think half of them died. Nobody was worried. Everybody knew everything would be fine because the hard rock mine does not burn.
I didn't have a self-rescuer. They had some old ones in a locker. They were beating on with pipe wrenches trying to get them to work. Don Beener, the guy that I give him credit for saving my life, had a flashlight-looking battery about so long, yay high, with a mouthpiece on it. And he took it out of his mouth and put it in mine until I got to where I could breathe again. And then I felt I'd better give it back to him because it was his anyway. And I gave it back to him, and I got some rags and soaked them in water and tried to breathe through the rags.
The 3700 level was the main travel route from the number 10 shaft to the Jewel shaft. The man train was on this level, and the miners were familiar with the route it took. The 3700 level, however, was one of the first levels to be overcome with deadly smoke and gases. The miners who were belled to the 3700 level did not survive the trip.
The shaft crew had already called and summoned for the skip to come down and get us out of here, so they had the skip come down and they had gotten on the skip, and my partner had gotten on the skip, and I got on the skip, and my partner was twice as old as me. I was 25 and he was 50, and he had had asthma, and so he carried those inhalers. He carried 2 or 3 inhalers with him in his dinner bucket, and he forgot to get his dinner bucket when we got on the skip, and he wanted to take a shot through his inhaler because the smoke was really bothering his asthma bad. And he mentioned to me, he goes, "Oh," he says, "I forgot my bucket." Well, I knew he had laid his bucket down on the station, so I stepped off the skip to go get his dinner bucket for him, and then I was going to return to the skip with it. Well, when I stepped off the skip, I didn't know it at the time, but this is where Jesus Christ took a hand in my life. And I stepped off the skip, and I went over and I got his dinner bucket, and I went back to the skip, and 3 other fellows had gotten on the skip when I stepped off, and that filled up the skip, and there was no room for me to get on the skip. So the skip was belled away to the 3,700 level, and those individuals got off on 3,700, and every one of them died.
The men waiting below for the number 10 Chippy hoist waited in vain. The hoistmen had been overcome by the smoke and did not respond to their desperate calls. The 48-man Chippy hoist was out of business, leaving only the single-deck double drum as an escape.
So finally the skip come down to take the crews out, the crews that were there. We filled the skip up, and my partner was on that skip, and I said, "There's not enough room for me to get on here." I said, "Go ahead and I'll catch the next one." He says, "No, you're not going to catch the other skip. You're getting on here with me."
Who was your partner?
Daryl Anderson. And he says, "No, you're going with me." So he reached out, and the skip was on, had muck on it about like this, and because I was pulling muck on the chippy, or the double drum. And it was slanted, so I just stuck my feet in there like this, and they throwed their arms around, throwed me around me, and held me in like this with the way going up. No doors on the skip, just wide open from 5,000 to 3,100. And here we was, and then Ernie Bailey was on that skip with me, and the smoke was coming down through that shaft so bad that it felt like it was just gonna burn your eyes right out of you. So I took it, and Ernie Bailey says, "Can I have a bite of that?" He was talking about my self-rescuer. I said, "Yeah." I give it to him. He stuck it in his mouth. And we got by. When we hit 3,400, the smoke had changed.
Communication underground was a problem. There was a single telephone system with 13 separate phones located on the different levels and work areas. Shift bosses throughout the mine were frantically trying to reach the surface to get information on what was going on and how they could save their men.
The phone systems back in them days were just old battery hand cranks. Anybody in the whole system could pick it up and listen to. And that was a lot of the troubles because everybody started at the same time very excitedly firing up these. We got smoke here, smoke there, and all this when it first happened. That they really didn't know for sure where it was.
The shifters didn't leave at that time because they still had crews down there. They took responsibility for their own crews, and they wouldn't leave until their last man was out. So they remained, tried to help, tried to direct people, and they didn't make it either. I believe there was a lot of heroes in that fire.
Most of the men who survived were those who were hoisted to the 3,100 level. Very few of the miners had ever been to this level. It was a maze of haul roads and side drifts where men could be lost or trapped.
None of these guys knew how to get out on 31. Nobody knew with 31 drift. They'd come down, took the man train down, catch the man train back to 37 and 10. They'd never been out 31 drift. 31 was a old haulage drift that had many ins and outs, and so as we're going along, I'm telling them where we're at, so that kind of give them an encouragement, because come on, let's go. and told him when we got to 5 shaft and it was really boiling, whatever. And I says, well, we're 5 shaft, we're halfway home. Keep on. But at the same time, my lungs are just burning and my eyes are burning, and you can't, and your feet feel like lead because you can't hardly pick them up, and and the smoke keeps getting thicker and thicker until finally we got out to 4 shaft, and then the fresh air hit us.
I've worked on 3100, so I knew my way around on that level, but many of those fellows did not know the way around. In fact, I think there's one other fellow that knew that level. So between the two of us, we led those guys out. Nobody ran, but we walked out. We were in smoke till we got to 4 shaft, and then the air just cleared up. It was miserable. Nobody passed out or nothing. I mean, we were all standing upright. We were helping those who seemed to have problems, but we all made it out.
We went up to 3100, and they instructed us to walk out to the Jewell station, which was a mile away. And Clyde Napier, he was the chippy doctor at that time, and Homer Benson and I started to walk out. When you think about it, though, we did more staggering than walking. And I kept thinking, if Clyde falls down, we'll grab him and carry him. But all the poison gas was down low. And if he'd have fell down and we'd have went after him, we'd have probably all been there. So, and they were dying just 5 minutes behind us, maybe not that long. The guy that kept me alive on 37, he put backpacks on a timber truck and went back in. That's when he died.
And that was Don Beener?
Don Beener.
The Sunshine Mine had brothers, fathers and sons, uncles and in-laws, all working together underground. Del Kitchen had several family members underground that day.
Then I came back and then sat there and watched for people that they brought out. They brought 7 off at 3700 that were dead. And then the foremans and the supervisors didn't want us to go over, and I told them that they weren't going to stop me from doing it. I was going to do it anyway because I was concerned about my family. My dad was there and my brother was still underground, both of them. But when I come through, I knew that they wasn't going to come out. It's really something to have to tell these people that all we can do is hope and pray that they're all right. But yet they were dead, and it was hard for me to do these things, even to my own family.
The Sunshine had a mine rescue crew commonly called a helmet crew. Many of the miners on the crew at that time didn't take it too seriously. After all, a hard rock mine couldn't catch on fire, so why would you need a helmet crew?
We took the course as a way to get overtime, and then it was something that was good to know, how to be able to operate under one of these machines at the time, but we never thought we'd ever have to use it. That was the farthest thing from your mind is a hard rock mine catching on fire. Your biggest fear was a rock falling on you, air blast, or something to that nature, but a fire, no.
Bob Lonhart, the safety supervisor of the Sunshine, had been in the mine that morning for an inspection. He'd come up around 11 and after showering was sitting down to eat his lunch when he got the call that there was a problem.
I never got my first bite because about the time that I had opened the dinner bucket, I received a phone call from the shop foreman, Tom Hara, stating that there's a fire in the mine. They want you to bring the helmets to number 10 shaft on 3100. I didn't put my mine clothes back on. I put my mine boots on, my mine belt, and grabbed a hard hat. And then my mine rescue training told me to do one more thing. I went over to the mine rescue room and obtained a mine safety lamp, a flame safety lamp, and a Draeger gas detector and some detector tubes so I could check for gases from the fire.
The Jewell shaft was the primary intake airway for the Sunshine. As Bob and the others went down the Jewel, they had plenty of fresh air coming in behind them, but as they moved toward the number 10 shaft, they found thick black smoke and some of their co-workers.
When I got down to the 3100 level, several people asked me, what are you going to do? What are you going to do? I'm going to take these apparatus back to the number 10 shaft. We're going with you, they said. And there were 3 other people who joined me. Don Beener was one, Larry Hawkins was one, and Jim Zingler. So those 3 people, and they were all people who had been trained in mine rescue. At least one of them, I found out later, had been in very heavy smoke earlier on, and consequently had already had a significant amount of carbon monoxide poisoning. We never got to number 10 shaft. When we got back into where I could see, there was a crosscut from our right that was spewing or carrying just a real heavy, dark, black smoke. So I signaled the motorman to stop, and I told everybody, put on your breathing apparatus. We're getting into some heavy smoke. And I told Larry, go slowly, because I don't want to run over anybody that's coming out. And we got back perhaps, I don't know, 600 feet, 800 feet, moving slowly in really heavy smoke, and we came across another individual. It was Byron Schultz. And he was obviously distressed in many different ways. Well, while we were preparing the apparatus to put it on him, Don Beener took his face mask off and extended it out and said, here, breathe this is good air. And in a matter, it seemed, it was not a very long period of time, a matter of 10 or 15, 20 seconds when he collapsed. Don did. And the only thing that I could conclude, I think he was so toxic from breathing carbon monoxide that he didn't really know what he was doing.
He was the only helmeted casualty during the fire. And I think there's a lesson to be learned there for a mine rescue man. And that's, if you become a casualty, you're not going to help somebody else. To put your mask, your apparatus on somebody else at that point is not a good idea. Carry other oxygen equipment and put oxygen on them, yes, but don't give up your own.
News was spreading through the Silver Valley that something was happening at the Sunshine. Wives and mothers, children and friends and co-workers began to gather in the mine yard. They had no real news, but they could see for themselves the thick smoke pouring from the mine.
I remember I seen I was driving a truck and come up to the yard, and we have a big exhaust fan up on the hill, kind of like a smokestack on it. Looked up there and just smoke was just rolling out that, and then word started getting around there was a fire in the ground. Nobody knew how bad it was or anything. And
miners' wives were no strangers to bad news. They understood the dangers their men faced every day, but it was obvious that this was not a small problem.
It was a beautiful day out, and dawn was afternoon shift. Somebody came down the canyon and said, the men that are working afternoon shift will not be coming home because they are going to try to rescue the men that are underground. I was terrified, and I didn't want him to return, but he informed me that he said, if I was down there, you would want somebody to come after me. And I said, that's true.
Families prepared to stay at the mine site until they knew what had happened. Community organizations, including the Steelworkers Union, the Red Cross, and churches brought food, blankets, and cots.
There were people camping out there for the first week or two until they got the bodies out. It was, I don't know how many people there was, probably 100 people out there at any given time, and Sunshine was feeding them, giving them blankets, whatever they needed. They used the warehouse there for kind of a center for handing out sandwiches and lunches, and they were handing out lunches for the guys going underground, and it was fairly chaotic around here for at least the first couple of weeks.
The other mines in the area were notified. The Bunker Hill, a huge mine in nearby Kellogg, had a lot of experience with fires and had a well-trained helmet crew.
We at the Bunker Hill had just finished a very extensive mine rescue training, where not only were we just putting the apparatuses on and walking around with them, they actually put us through obstacle courses. So with that group in mind, then our management let the Sunshine Management know early on that we were prepared if they needed any mine rescue help. And we were mobilized that afternoon. We arrived mid-afternoon, I'm thinking 3:30, 4 o'clock, something like that.
The Sunshine's afternoon shift was beginning to report in. No one really knew what was going on underground, but rumors were flying.
We just thought it might be something that might have burned up, like that put something out of commission, like a big intake fan or something like that, to where we wasn't getting enough air in the mine, or maybe a hoist or something to that effect. It was nothing that you thought, there was nothing where you'd ever think there'd be a fatality. You know, hard rock mine, what do you got to burn? And I think that's what everybody thought. Rock doesn't burn.
Most of their bosses and stuff were down underground, and they made it real bad at that time too, because our checkout in and out system was basically the boss's record book, and the boss had the record book, so there was no real way to know who was down there or who made it out or what.
We went through a real quick crash course. We needed people as soon as possible. I'd say they trained us thorough, but it was fast. You paid real close attention. And from that point on, I think that's what made a big difference in my life, because people got to realize that any one person can make a difference. And I think that, I think I did. I feel I did. I felt I did something to help somebody.
Back then they had the McKays, the older type self-contained breathing apparatuses, and they was clumsy and bulky, and I just had, I wore them outside. And the training was back then was real minimal. It's just what they needed to do. A lot of people didn't know what to do at that time.
In 1972, mine rescue equipment was primitive. The Sunshine Mine used McKays, which weighed over 40 pounds and provided only 2 hours of air, severely limiting rescue efforts. Despite these limitations, men were trained, and the first helmet crews went underground and found deadly smoke and the bodies of miners.
I'd not seen that sort of a situation in my life. There were people had died on the way out. There were 30, 40 bodies before we could even get to the hoist room on 3100. It was very difficult for the Sunshine people. It was, in some respect, it was, we were lucky to come in from outside and not know and not see our friends.
They knew that there were 5 people that hadn't made it out that were right beyond that point. So they went back with timber trucks and stretchers, and they brought those 5 people, those 5 bodies out. So it was kind of a sad first day.
As rescuers worked their way toward the number 10 shaft, they feared the worst. No one close to the number 10 had survived. Miners were found at the shaft stations, in hoist rooms, and along the tracks. The lethal combination of carbon monoxide and other poisonous gases had made it impossible for anyone to survive, but they did not give up hope. As the days wore on, families and company employees kept their vigil. The Silver Valley was united in the face of tragedy to support those who waited.
When anything happens here in the Silver Valley, when any disaster strikes, I don't know where people come out of the woodwork or whatever, but they're there immediately to try to give you support, and just to let you know they're thinking of you, whether they know you or not.
What I recall the most during the fire itself is how everybody was grouped together, was here to support each other. Everybody pulled together and supported the the survivors or the families what was sitting and waiting for so long to find out if their loved one was coming out or not alive.
I think you know, that's a long time ago, but I think we heard that that fire was going on almost as soon as it started. I remember I had kids in my room that their dads worked there, and they were frantic. And well, what do you say? What do you say? You go on and you give them love and respect and hugs, and we didn't have any counselors at that day. I loved them. When they cried, I cried, and I hugged them some more. And we all got through it.
Our family situation was a little bit different than the others. I mean, when my mother went to the mine, they knew men were dead. They already knew it. And I can't remember if it was May 3rd or May 4th, they brought my dad out. My dad was the last one brought out of the mine before they quit bringing out people and just strictly went to looking for survivors. And a lot of those people, it was a long, long wait. We knew he was dead fairly quickly. And I think that was probably the hardest part for the whole families, is the ones that just waiting, hoping their loved one would be found alive, where we knew it was too late for my dad.
The rescue effort was heroic. The primary goals of the rescuers were to keep themselves safe and at the same time secure the mine and find survivors. The fire was still raging and conditions underground remained deadly.
What we were doing were primarily sealing off 3100 so that we could get back to the station in fresh air. The idea was to move your fresh air base as close as you could to the fire, do primarily reconnaissance to determine if there were any survivors, and as important, accounting for all the missing people.
They did it real well here, making sure that when one team was down doing something that was in contaminated air, that they had another team backed up.
Rescuers were in constant danger. As the fire burned through timber supports, the mine began to collapse, severing electrical and communication lines and destroying the ventilation system. The polyurethane foam lining the drifts and bulkheads burned, sending out thick clouds of deadly gases. The heat was unbearable.
One of the things that happens with polyurethane foam combustion is, of course, in a situation like that, it actually gets the timbers burning. And it burns in what they call a fuel-rich mode. Fuel-rich meaning there's more material burning than there's oxygen available to support the combustion. So the combustion will ebb, it'll increase and decrease as the oxygen is made up. Well, in the combustion gases of the test fire in England, carbon monoxide ranged from 3 to 7%. Oxygen was down to as little as 1%. The temperature ranged as high as 2,250 degrees Fahrenheit.
We had a fresh air base established at 5 Shaft, and then we made an extension. We set up a cord, a cable, and strung it out. And we went back to the cable shop, and we found, and the hoist room and the stuff on 37, we found everybody was dead there. We turned around and came back out, and went back to 5 Shaft, and then went back up. But when we got out to 37, we heard a loud boom. We thought it was an air blast. What had happened, that raise, right there where we had our rolls set up for our lifeline, that raise had fell through. It was burning up above there, and when it burned and fell through, it burned, there was not even an ash left. It sealed off the drift. If we'd have been there, they wouldn't have found no sign of us. They wouldn't even have found an ash of us. We'd been totally cremated. And we was just lucky that it didn't fall while we was there,
The rescuers worked toward the number 10 shaft from 2 different sides of the mine, through the Jewel shaft on the west and through the Silver Summit or Consil mine on the east side of the mountain. The Consil connected to the Sunshine at the 3100 level and was maintained as a secondary escapeway and ventilation exhaust. As rescuers made their way deeper into the mine, they found no one alive.
It was like a nightmare, because once we come to the end of where we had fresh air, you then had to go into the contaminated air, but you also had to go into the tin shaft. And on tin shaft station and in the hoist room and around in the drifts, there was lots of dead people. Lots of dead people. Now you got to remember, I'm only 23 years old. And you know, I think if I had it all to do over again, I was wanting to help save, you know, my friends are trapped in the mine. So it's very important for me to get trained and get down there and be helping my friends. It's extremely hard to pick the bodies of your friends up, because it was just tough. It was a tough thing to do.
The number 10 shaft was the only way to get down to the deep levels of the mine, and neither one of the hoists was working. Before rescuers could get into lower levels to look for survivors, they had to get the hoist running again. This was a huge job.
The power was screwed up on the hoist on 31, and we had to go in and take new electric line in and hook it up. And we was in a hurry to do that, thinking that there might still be somebody alive on the lower levels. So we didn't bother with trying to move the bodies out. So we had to step over all the guys that were on 31 that had died on the way out.
As the rescuers frantically worked to restore hoists and look for survivors, the days were passing. Unknown to them, 2 men were alive down on the 4800 level. Ron Flory and Tom Wilkinson were partners working in a raise several thousand feet away from the number 10 shaft. They had been told about the fire and went out to the shaft station to see what was happening.
At that time, I really didn't even care. It didn't even dawn on us how serious it could get. We just said I would put up a little smoke and that'd be no problem, we'd get out.
We didn't believe that there's a fire in the mine. Think about it, what can burn in a hard rock mine? Well, we all stood around the station, rang for a cage, and then everybody stood around talking and waiting for the cage to come. Then smoke kept getting heavier and heavier, and our self-rescuers started getting warm and hard to breathe through, so we'd pull the self-rescuers out and breathe around them till they cooled down and then put them back in. Tom and I had went out to the main drift and was going to open an air door, see if that would take the smoke that way instead of back to where we was at. So we were trying to get it open, and Tom passed out. And I carried him back to the motor barn where the rest of the guys were, and we put him on top of a motor and took him back to where there was fresh air. Well, we thought there was fresh air earlier, and there was still fresh air there. One guy took the motor out and tried to use the telephone, and apparently the rest of them got on the motor and tried to get back to where we was at and didn't make it. They got within, probably 150 yards of where we was at, and all of them perished.
And the next thing I knew, I was back here in the drift, and they were, Ron was telling me I'm all right, you're all right. And then I came to, and Ron started walking back down the drift towards the station, and then pretty quick he come back and he told me, he says, Tommy, they're just laying all over. So at that time, him and I both went out there, and Dick was on the motor and he was slumped over. And we grabbed Dick and we dragged him off the motor and put him on kind of this cubby hole, and we tried to revive him then, and there was nothing. We knew he was dead.
Tom and Ron were not trained in mine rescue, but the sight of their co-workers' bodies convinced them they needed to stay where they were and wait to be rescued. It was a long 8 days.
We weren't at the borehole. We were probably 100 yards from the borehole, but we could see a wall of smoke coming back that far, and then it was going into a side drift and down to 5,000 level. And so we just more or less stayed right there. We knew as long as that wall of smoke stayed there, that we would be safe, because we had fresh air coming in behind us.
And I think the first day, Ron and I, we tapped into the water line there, so we had water with us all the time, and we drank a lot of water. We always tried to keep water in us, because it gets pretty warm down. I'd say it's probably 100, probably then at least 100 degrees anyway.
On the surface, crews from the U.S. Bureau of Mines were working at two main efforts. They were training miners to work under helmets, and they were convinced that there was a chance that some men had survived if they had only found their way back to the newly finished number 12 borehole. This borehole had been completed just a week before and was located about 1,500 yards from the number 10 shaft between 3,700 and 4,800 levels. Fresh air was forced through it from the surface. If anyone survived, it would be there. Bureau rescuers borrowed a torpedo capsule from the Atomic Energy Commission and prepared to send Wayne Kanak and Don Morris down the borehole. This was a dangerous thing to do. The borehole was unlined and barely large enough for the torpedo to fit through. If any rock broke loose, anyone inside would be trapped. Tom and Ron were beginning to wonder what was going on. They still had no idea how bad the fire was or how many people were dead. They just knew they had been waiting a long time.
We were out in the smoke 7 different times the time we was down there. And we didn't know until later that we thought if we wet our t-shirts and put our t-shirts over our mouths that would help save us. We didn't find out till later that did absolutely no good, but made us feel like it did.
We was always worried, wondering what was going on, but we never really panicked. I think when one of them as get down, when you get, or you might be losing something, the other guy was there to talk him out of it.
No, we never actually give up hope. Like I said earlier, we knew they had to come down to get us, and we just hoped that they would get there before it was too late for us.
On May 9th, Ron and Tom were discussing their situation, when Ron thought he saw a light flashing.
It was in the afternoon, the day we were rescued, and I think Ron and I we were both there laying what we call our bed boards. And we've been talking, and Ron's the one that seen the light first, and he's seen a reflection off the wall. And he told me, he said, there's a light coming down the tunnel tonight. And that's where the borehole was back there, and I thought, man, he's really losing it this time. And I said, I told him, you're nuts. But no, he says, there's a light.
They had sent a crew down the borehole, and we didn't know until after they found us, but the day before they were within 100 yards of us, and they didn't know it, and we didn't know it.
The survivors were brought up to the surface. Rescuers brought stretchers, but both men refused to be carried. When they came out of the portal, the gathered crowd went wild.
When we come out, got to the main station there, they wanted to put us on a timber truck and push us out. And Tom and I both told them, no, we walked in, we're going to walk out. So the guy got on each side of us, and they let us walk out.
And I remember when we first got to the portal, and they opened the doors, and the lights just hit us, and people just started clapping and hollering. And I just couldn't imagine the amount of people who were out there who was cheering us on. It's hard to believe, especially after there was probably a bunch of them up there that already knew that they lost somebody in their family.
When we come out of the portal and saw all the lights, and we just more or less put our heads down to shade our eyes. And both of us walked past our wives, and we didn't see them. They reached out and grabbed us as we were walking by. We got a little flack on that. But,
Tom and Ron were taken to the local hospital for observation. They were very hungry. Cecil Andrus, the governor of Idaho, was there and made sure they got cold beer with their dinners.
And I remember Governor Andrus, and I can't remember who else it was, he sent down and asked what we wanted. Of course, we wanted a beer. So Governor Andrus sent whoever was with him down and gets a 6-pack of beer.
Back at the mine, the news that 2 survivors had been found spread to the rescue crews working underground. They were thrilled, and the good news renewed their efforts.
Man, it was something else to see 2 of your co-workers come to the surface, and it was something that you just didn't think was going to happen after what you had seen, and you knew how many that had gone, and for them to come up, and it was a miracle, you know.
For 4 more days, rescuers struggled to gain access to the lower levels of the mine. When they reached the 5,200 level, they finally accepted the fact that no one else would be brought out alive.
When we come down the shaft to 5,200, okay, what we really know now is this is the last level. This is, you know, and this is what I'm feeling. This is what's in my heart. This is the last level, and I'm really, you know, I'm wanting to, you know, I'm wanting someone to be alive. But I'm apprehensive, you know, and I'm scared. And I'll never forget this. It looked like the guys were all just standing around in a group, because when we went there, they were piled on top of each other. Like the gas just hit them and they just all died just immediately. You couldn't recognize people. We had to unpile them to take care of them.
Recovery of the Sunshine took many months. Areas of the mine were unstable after their timbered supports had burned. Ties supporting the rail tracks had also burned. Electrical lines and components used to power the hoists all had to be replaced. Many of the surviving Sunshine miners worked in the recovery effort. Just as many were laid off and had to find work elsewhere. When the mine finally reopened 7 months after the fire, it was obvious that the Sunshine had changed forever.
Before the fire and stuff, you had bosses that were miners. When they told you something, you could understand it. They knew what they were talking about. And you lost the men that were training. After that, you could say that if you put a hard hat on, you were a miner. And you would have accidents, one right after another. And I think that it cost Sunshine. It really had. I believe that my primary inspiration came from that Sunshine Fire. I lost a lot of friends. I lived for years after that fire with the visions of the bodies of my friends and the condition of the bodies when we brought them out. And I would wake up at night crying, and I did it for a long time. And it's taken me a long time to get that out of my mind.
When the mine reopened, some of the Sunshine miners could not bring themselves to go back underground. Others returned because it was the only life they knew.
It gets in your blood. I mean, it really does. It's in your blood. It's something that somebody, my relation always told me after the mine fire, they said, "Why did you go back there?" I said, "I just had to. I had to go back. It's just something that gets into a miner's mind that tells you got to go back. So you go back, and you go on."
The Sunshine Mine Fire was one of the worst hard rock mine fires of the 20th century in America. 91 people lost their lives, but many lessons were learned. Few people deny that hard rock mining is safer now than it was before the fire. The Metal, Non-Metal Health and Safety Act of 1977 was a direct result of the fire. It finally put some teeth into the safety regulations for hard rock mines and mandated that every miner receive adequate training before they are ever sent underground.
The Sunshine Fire changed mine safety and health. It changed regulations, it increased regulations, and certainly increased training requirements. For example, in mine rescue training we had before, we would train for 8 hours a year. Now it's 48 hours a year. New employees might have a few hours of safety training. Now, if they're inexperienced, they have to have 40 hours of training.
Back then, our mine rescue crews did not train only about once a year, and that was it. Now we train 4 times a year. We train in smoke.
After that, the safety training took on a whole new meaning. You know, the guys started actually asking questions in the safety meetings and stuff. The guys didn't know underground that if the rescuer got hot, it was working. And when they get hot, they'd jerk it out of their mouth, and 2 seconds later, they were dead.
Because of that fire, they made a lot of changes that I think have really helped mining. For one thing, the hoistmans all have a breathing apparatus in the hoist room with them, and it's checked out continuously to make sure it's in good shape. And everybody carries a self-rescuer with them. And we've had extensive training on the use of them. A lot of those boys I sacked up had self-rescuers in their mouth, but they didn't know that when that thing got hot, I mean, it might have been told to us in class, but you either don't pay attention or you have a tendency to forget, and a lot of miners are hard to hear.
You know, the concept was rock don't burn, and there was no refuge chambers in at all, which now we have refuge chambers that are quite well supplied with water and air, and all have phones in them and everything else.
And now it's set up where the training plans, you are properly trained before you go underground. Your first job when you go underground is to learn all your escape routes. Before you ever start on a job, you know the way out. It goes back to kindergarten. When we take our school kids to kindergarten to the first grade, what do? They have fire drills. We do too. And I think that has helped a lot. Mines in general have really stepped up their ventilation. They try to make it where they have the capability of shutting doors, turning off fans, and isolating anything that would happen so that people can come out. All our escape routes are set up so that no matter which way you're escaping, you're not going to come out through the smoke like we had to. You'll be escaping into fresh air all the time.
One of the hardest lessons taught by the sunshine was that the impossible was in fact possible. Survivors of the fire worry that miners may become complacent, believing as they did that a hard rock mine cannot burn. If this happens, another disastrous fire is inevitable.
I've long been afraid that we're going to have another disaster. I believe that we've set ourselves up for it. History repeats itself, and God, I don't want to see a bunch of miners killed again, particularly due to a fire. I mean, for Pete's sakes, that's something that we can prevent.
I believe I learned an awful lot from that fire. I believe it put more responsibility on myself instead of somebody else. Right now, with the education I have on mining through the years, I know I am not going into an area unless I know I can get back out of it. I'm not going to do a job unless I know I can do it safely. It's not worth it.
I'd have a message for the companies, and that's that don't become complacent. Keep your mines clean, keep them organized. Make sure your mine rescue teams are trained well. Make sure every individual that goes in that mine is trained well in the use of not only the self-rescuer, but in how to get out of the mine. There's many, many times I've interviewed people in mines that don't know the escape ways, that truly don't know how to get out of that mine if a disaster happens. And remember, if it happens, it's black, it's smoky, they can't see, there's confusion. Train them well, you'll save lives.
The men who survived the Sunshine Fire and those who worked on the rescue and recovery efforts will never forget what happened in May of 1972. The Sunshine Memorial, located at the bottom of the Big Creek Canyon just off I-90 in Idaho's Silver Valley, reminds everyone of the high price paid by our nation's underground miners.
A lot of people went through a terrible, terrible problem because of this with my sisters, and mostly my sisters because I was the only boy left then. But I had to be there for them, for my uncles, for my aunts, and I couldn't mourn like they did because I could help them, but I couldn't do it because I had to be there for them. And I maybe wished that I probably had done something a little different that would have helped me, but I would never want to go through that again.
Well, you know, that fire had a big impact on this mine and in this area here. I mean, you know, you even could smell death. I mean, in this area, the flowers for the graves, you know, it was unbelievable. You can even smell it in the air. I mean, it was kind of, I don't know, it was sad, really sad.
Well, it was just hard on everybody. You know, it was hard on me, as you can see. I remember I went home and I just cried. But it was a big shock for everybody. And I think everybody had the same feeling I was. I wasn't all by myself. All the other rescuers, all the people were, you know, it was like, man, you know, it was just, everybody was heartbroken. It's just like anything else, you just keep going on.
The Sunshine Mine closed forever on February 16, 2001. It had been the premier silver producer for our nation, operating for 115 years. As the miners left the mine after their final shift, they left behind a mine that provided fabulous wealth for our nation, a good living for its miners, and a harsh, if invaluable lesson to those who ignore the dangers of underground mining.